So in this week's column, you've looked at the upcoming 2+2 ministerial between Japan and India. I think Rajnath Singh and Mr. Jaishankar are going to Japan for the ministerial. One of the things you point out, the focus of the piece is that within Japan, now you pointed to this before in your columns as well, that there has been a move, Japan's sort of post-war pacifism, which is almost very much part of a national identity and has a huge domestic constituency. First under his predecessor, now under PM Kishida, they're trying to move away from that very gradually. Counter-strike capabilities on the one hand, talk of sort of a nuclear sharing arrangement with the US on the other. How do you see this playing out? Do you think part of it is, say, during the Trump administration, this apprehension or this understanding of a new reality where the US, relying on the US protection alone is not going to be enough, with China being as belligerent as it is in the Indo-Pacific? First part of question one. And so the second part is, how much of resistance, political resistance, might there be to this? Political and even sort of ideological resistance within Japan, because this goes against the grain of how they've almost defined themselves for the better part of the century.
See, I think in Japan, I think they find that China's assertiveness on territorial issues, because has firstly in South China Sea, we saw that happen over the last decade. Second, in the East China Sea, where China and Japan have a maritime territorial dispute. The Chinese Air Force, Chinese are constantly, pushing around, trying to penetrate Japanese airspace, forcing the Japanese to scramble. So there is of the kind of cat and mouse games that the Chinese do. They're doing a lot of that. And second, for Japan, the Chinese policy under Xi Jinping to retake Taiwan also poses huge security challenges. That is, for them, the Chinese aggressiveness under Xi Jinping is a real problem. I mean, I think unlike us, the Japanese have invested huge amounts, billions of dollars in China's development over the last 4 decades. They have huge economic stakes there. But I think China's aggressiveness under Xi Jinping has complicated life for them. So therefore, I think they're being compelled to rethink their security policies. One, as you question on the question of the US alliance, there is no alternative to that. So they're not trying to abandon it. They're trying to build on that. They're trying to do more on the alliance. And the US too, today is ready to do a lot more with the alliance than it was before. So therefore, it is alliance plus. What is new in Japan's strategy is alliance plus. They want to do more things with Australia, with India, help the smaller countries to build themselves up to deal with the Chinese power. So that is the direction they're going in. And as they go in the direction, I mean, will there be resistance? Yes, there will be some resistance. The pacifists within Japan are opposed to any offensive capabilities, while actually Kishida is talking about developing an offensive capability. Second, on the nuclear sharing arrangement, might involve deployment of US nuclear weapons on Japan's soil. There again, there is a traditional resistance. But I think the tension is between the changed external environment and the continuing domestic resistance. So how he'll overcome that is the issue. But looking over a 20-year period, there is no question Japan has moved a lot. And I think that's where that brings them in line with India, which also has a similar problem today, that a border that was peaceful and tranquil for almost 3 decades today has become live thanks to China's unilateral actions. So therefore, I think the question is, what do we do together to deal with a common threat that we have?
So the second, for India, there's been, what kind of cooperation do you see going forward in terms of defense and strategic partnership? There's already some things going on with the Quad, of course, but that's, no matter how much China calls it an Asian NATO, it has actually a very minimal defense component. And there's some sort of exercises. Do you think there's a sort of make in India and defense kind of thing in partnership with Japan, where in terms of civilian cooperation and technology sharing, we have a long and there's a lot of mutual trust between the two governments as well as private sector partnerships. So do you think there's some way to build on that in the strategic realm now?
Exactly. I think that is one of the key questions because Japan always had a very significant military arms production capability. But it was a small, focused internally. and they would only work with the United States. They would export things to the US or participate in US joint manufactures, but they would not engage other countries in defense collaboration, on the defense industrial collaboration. You remember maybe 10 years ago, we tried to buy an aircraft from the Japanese, this aircraft that moves on water as well as on the ground, for our Andaman defense, etc. But we couldn't really clinch the deal because one, the price was high, and second, the Japanese was still putting conditionalities on their exports. So that is one big problem. While Japan now talks about helping other countries or working to improve the capacities of other countries in the region, there are still the question of past conditionalities relating to non-proliferation, end use. Those issues, it's not clear whether they've been fully lifted or not. Therefore, what India would want is a clean commitment from Japan. As India looks to strengthen its domestic defense industrial capacity, and Japan already has fairly historically strong manufacturing capacity, can we work together on defense manufacturing? For Japan, I think it'll be an advantage of working with a large Indian market. For India, Japanese bring in a whole lot of advanced technologies, and the US has no objections to India and Japan working together. While they might have problems with what India does with Russia, they don't have any objections to India working closely with Japan in the defense sector. So I think this is where the possibility exists that the bringing the Japanese defense industrial capabilities in line with India's own strategy of defense, Atmanirbharata or self-reliance that we are talking about.
Right. So just to supplement you, in the piece you mentioned as well that Japan is not only in the Indo-Pacific, but also looking to Europe, say countries like France, to have them engage them in a more sustained manner. Again, they're both in terms of sort of hard defense kind of production, but as well as diplomacy. Do you think India has a role there as well? Because France, for one, we've had now quite a blossoming relationship with in the strategic realm.
Exactly. I think because I think if you go back to the recent history of the concept of Indo-Pacific and the Quad, both really originated in Japan. I think they were probably the first to see the rise of China and its implications for regional balance. So they're the ones who articulated the concept of Indo-Pacific. They're also the ones who talked about the idea of a Quad. But now they're in the forefront of saying we must bring the Europeans to play a larger role in Asia. And I think France is one of their important considerations. Britain is another one. And India has good engagement with both these countries. So therefore, we can imagine a triangular engagement because France is also a resident Asian power. Britain has some islands where it is, historic islands here. France is active in the Western Indian Ocean. So I think that opens up a lot more possibilities. But for now, the linchpin is, while India's bilateral defense cooperation with the US has expanded, it is yet to acquire a reasonable form with Japan. So priority should be how do we get India and Japan defense establishments to work together, to go beyond exercises, to actually do joint operations in peacekeeping, in humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. So I think we need to get to actual practical operational cooperation on the ground, which is what I think is possible. And I think that's where we need to go. I would also add Japanese Coast Guard is one of the most powerful forces in the region. And there is a lot Indian Coast Guard can do with the Japanese Coast Guard to help the regional countries, improve their ability to defend their own economic zones and territorial waters.
That's a final question. So, this just now the peg for us, as we say, the news peg is the ministerial, the bilateral. What are the 2 or 3 things that we should be looking at? And what are the positive indications just from this visit that that would say at least indicate some kind of forward? These are larger issues that will take, of course, a lot longer, but say 1 or 2 things, say in the joint statements or whatever comes out of this that we should be looking forward to.
No, my sense is, in fact, just before this meeting, there was a meeting of the defense industries of the 2 countries. So that was a good sign that whether the 2 governments are ready to create policy space for the industries in both countries, because in Japanese industry does not move with the government approval, and in India too, I mean, given the welter of restrictions. So I think if the meeting comes up with a vision for joint defense industrial collaboration, that would be a major outcome. The other is the helping third countries in the region. I mean, how do we pool our resources to help third countries in the region? Because there's a whole lot of countries from island states of the Western Indian Ocean to the Pacific Islands. They're looking for partners who can boost their capabilities. Here, neither India nor Japan nor the United States is big enough to do things on their own. So can we pool our resources to collaborate, to provide security to the weaker countries of the region? So I would look for these two potential outcomes.
Great, sir. Thanks so much, everyone. Read the piece. It actually has a lot more interesting things and background in it. It's available on the indianexpress.com and probably in the description of wherever you're watching this video. Thank you so much, sir. Talk again next week.
Thank you, Akash.